welcome back to our podcast. This is Start with the Weird with Reka and Roderick and Stacy, but Roderick is not here with us today, so it's just the two of us. And we are going to talk about Andrei Chikatilo. So this is part 2 of the Andrei Chikatilo episode. So Stacy, obviously you heard what we talked about in the first part. It's not an easy, quite disturbing case, I would say. And I said it in the first episode that it's probably the worst one that I have ever read about in my life.
I would agree. I was quite disgusted when I was reading it. It wasn't easy. It wasn't an easy read at all.
Nope. So you're pretty much prepared on what to come. We talked about his first murders, and now it's important to talk about the investigation, because the investigation against Andrei Chikatilo took about 8 years. And by January 1983, the authorities were forced to admit that 4 of the murders were the work of a single person. Major Mikhail Fetishov arrived from Moscow to take over the Rostov investigation and launched a specialized team under the name Operation Forest Path. He assigned 10 investigators to the project, but the real work fell to a forensic analyst named Viktor Burakov. So just to add, the movie Citizen X is about this Operation Forest Path. It's a really good movie, to be honest, but I wouldn't watch it again. When Olga Stalmachenok's body was discovered in April, Burakov was the one sent to examine the scene. He documented the 50 knife wounds and the empty chest cavity, but the marks on her eye sockets were what changed the investigation. Looking at those specific striations, Burakov realized the theory of separate crimes was dead. He was officially hunting a serial killer. The hunt went quiet until June 1983, when Chikatilo found 15-year-old Laura Sarkisian. He killed her and left her body in the woods near an unmarked railway platform outside Novocherkassk. By the time September rolled around, 5 more victims had been added to the count. The sheer volume of bodies and the identical patterns carved into them left the Soviet authorities with no room to hide behind excuses. The mounting evidence forced a rare admission from the state. On 6th of September 1983, the public prosecutor of the Soviet Union made it official by formally linking 6 of the murders to the same hand. The realization that a serial killer was operating across the region was no longer a theory held by a few investigators. It was a crisis the government had to acknowledge. The investigators were looking for logic in a situation that had none. Because the bodies were torn open with such precision, the police started chasing ghosts. They theorized that this was a professional operation harvesting organs for the black market, or perhaps the ritualistic work of a local satanic cult. When those theories went nowhere, they pivoted to the idea that the killer had to be a mentally ill individual or someone living on the fringes of society. The investigation turned into a massive dragnet focused on specific profiles. Detectives spent their time scrubbing the alibis of anyone who had ever been admitted to a psychiatric ward or held a criminal record for homosexuality or pedophilia. They built a sprawling card filing system, logging every registered sex offender in the region and cross-referencing their whereabouts with the dates of the murders. If a man could prove where he was cleared, and the police moved on to the next name on a list that was growing longer every day while the real killer was still out there traveling for work. So I don't know if you read that part, but basically someone was actually executed for his first crime. So there was a guy who was a sex offender, but there was no other evidence against him, but the police caught him. So they beaten the confession out of him and from his wife and another friend. So they all testified against him. And at the end, he was executed for the crime. And then obviously more bodies turned up.
He probably thought he got away with it at this point as well, didn't he? Probably thought, they're never going to catch me.
Definitely. I mean, I don't know exactly what number we are here, but I think maybe 10 victims so far. I didn't log every single of his murders because it would have been really, really long. But anyway, if we go further with this, you will see why they haven't caught him. But I think he was getting really cocky with these murders because he also didn't really hide the bodies. So he would just like throw some leaves and some dirt on them, and that was it.
Yeah, he probably was in this mindset, they're never going to find me. It doesn't really matter if they find a body because they're not going to pin it to me. That's often is their downfall, though, isn't it? It's when they start to get a bit cocky.
Well, unfortunately, it wasn't his downfall, but just to continue, by September 1983, the pressure to produce a killer turned the investigation into a factory for false confessions. Police began rounding up young men with intellectual disabilities, subjecting them to brutal marathon interrogations until they admitted to crimes they did not commit. The tactics were so aggressive that 3 men identified as homosexuals and 1 convicted sex offender took their own lives rather than face the relentless scrutiny of the task force. So this is a little bit heartbreaking, I think, that this happened, that people actually took their own lives just because the police were so relentless to try to catch someone and they were completely going the wrong direction with the whole investigation.
It must have been a really, really brutal interrogation as well, to be so scared that you're admitting to these crimes, you're saying you did it, and then you kill yourself after.
Definitely. I mean, it was the Soviet Union, and being homosexual was already, a crime, basically. So I'm wondering if these policemen felt bad about it at all, as they should have.
But also, you're not even getting the right confession. Like, at one point, you must think this is not working. Like, how do we know they're telling the truth? They probably just wanted someone to pin, didn't they?
They just wanted it. Okay, yeah, let's be done with it, and we'll see what happens. While the hunt for the Ripper stalled, the sheer scale of the police dragnet began to uncover the hidden rot of the Rostov region. So Rostov region is like quite a big region of Russia. I've never been there, but I looked at it on the map. This is where he lived. So by turning the city upside down, investigators managed to solve over 1,000 crimes that had nothing to do with the serial killer. They cleared 95 unrelated murders, 140 aggravated assault, and 245 rapes. So at least, something came out of it. It was a massive win for the Soviet statistics department, but for the task force, it was a distraction that left the actual predator completely untouched. The investigators were stacking up confessions, but the bodies kept appearing, exposing their interrogation tactics as a failure. On the 30th of October 1983, the remains of a 19-year-old prostitute named Vera Shevkun were discovered in Shakhty. She had been killed 3 days prior, and while her body bore the familiar signature of a frantic evisceration, there was one glaring difference. Her eyes were still intact. It was a deviation from the pattern, but the sheer savagery of the wounds left no doubt that the same man was responsible. The violence only intensified as the year came to a close. On the 27th of December, 14-year-old Sergei Markov was targeted after being lured off a train at a rural station near Novocherkassk. The attack on the schoolboy was one of the most brutal yet. Chikatilo delivered over 70 knife wounds, focusing on the neck and torso before emasculating the boy and tearing open his chest. Every time the police thought they had a suspect in a cell, another crime scene proved they were still chasing a ghost. So yeah, it's really hard to read about some of these things, and I tried to sort of numb it down a little bit so it wouldn't actually say what happened, but yeah, he did that quite a lot, that he removed genitals, both boys and both girls, of his victims. And it's absolutely terrifying and horrible, and I feel so sorry for these people, for these victims.
The amount of pain they must have gone through as well, just like, because they were alive, weren't they, when he did this?
I'm not quite sure. I would say, I think that happened after the death, but, 70 knife wounds.
Yeah, and like these are just kids as well. Like, yeah, this man is just a monster. I think this is definitely our worst one that we've read about so far.
I've watched loads of true crime and serial killer documentaries, and I think this is the worst one in the whole world. This guy was absolutely, it's just horrible.
He probably felt in his head that he was just this unstoppable force, like just constantly killing and just terrifying these poor people just before their death. It's just there's something about this story. I just think it makes me feel like physically sick just listening to it.
So there is a psychiatrist who did a profile on him, and it's going to be quite interesting later on, his sort of relationship with Andrei Chikatilo, because he would have been the only person he spoke to after he was caught, and he did say that he felt like an unstoppable wild wolf when he was committing these crimes, whilst in his life he just felt like a failure. And I mean, obviously that is the case. And now we got to 1984, which is the year I was born. And this year is like everything I had to write down is just shocked me to the core, but let's go through it. So in 1984, the year that marked the peak of the slaughter and the first time Chikatilo actually felt the breath of the law on his neck. He started the year by killing 2 women in Rostov's Park of Aviators across January and February. By March, he was bold enough to snatch 10-year-old Dmitry Pashnikov right from a stamp kiosk in Novoshakhtinsk. This time, he wasn't a ghost. Multiple witnesses saw him walking with the boy and provided the police with a detailed description of his face. When Dmitry's body was found 3 days later, the crime scene was a goldmine of evidence, yielding a footprint and samples of the killer's semen and saliva on the child's clothing. The killings became more personal in May. Chikatilo targeted Tatiana Petrosyan and her 10-year-old daughter Svetlana, leading them into a wooded area outside Shakhty. Tatiana had known Chikatilo for years, a familiarity he used to lead both mother and daughter to their deaths. The pace didn't slow down after that double murder. By the end of July, he had claimed 4 more victims, 3 young women and a 13-year-old boy. He was operating at a frequency that should have made him impossible to miss, yet he remained a free man. By the summer of 1984, Chikatilo's professional life was unraveling alongside his sanity. He was fired from his job as a supply clerk after being caught stealing 2 rolls of linoleum. The company had actually tried to let him resign quietly back in February to avoid a scandal, but he refused, stubbornly denying the theft until they finally forced him out. He didn't stay unemployed for long, landing a nearly identical clerk position in Rostov on August 1st. So I don't know if you read that part, but basically his job allowed him to travel distances, to sign contracts. I think he was getting like supplies from all over the country for the factory where he worked. This is another reason why they didn't catch him, because he would commit most of the murders where he lived or around where he lived, but also he would do it in other places far away from his home.
I guess that might have been another reason why he was so just desperate to keep that job, because obviously he needed it as an alibi and also to get to these places.
Definitely. So the new job didn't slow him down, it seemed to embolden him. The very next day he was back in the Park of Aviators, where he killed 16-year-old Nataya Goloshavkaya. 5 days later he targeted 17-year-old Ludmila Alexeyeva. He used a familiar ruse, promising to show her a shortcut to a bus terminal to lead her toward the banks of the Don River. The attack on Alexeyeva was calculated and exceptionally cruel. He delivered 39 slash wounds, intentionally avoiding her vital organs at first to ensure she remained conscious while he mutilated and disemboweled her. Jesus. When her body was discovered the next morning, the investigators found her excised upper lip stuffed inside her own mouth, a final horrific detail in a summer of escalating depravity. Jesus Christ. Oh, I might need to stop for a moment.
This man is a monster. He is just a pure monster. Oh, I feel really sick just even thinking of this. Like, what possessed him to even like think about doing these crimes? Like, and they're so regular as well. Like, these are just the ones they know about. Like, he probably did so many more that he just never admitted to or forgot about.
He did 52 murders, but when they were doing the investigation, they didn't discover all of them, but he later on admitted to all of the murders he did. Yeah. Anyway, I'm trying to get through these parts a little bit faster and trying not to think about it, but obviously it's hard not to think about it when you're reading them out loud. But I'm just trying to just smash through this because I don't really want to think about it, because I'm quite empathetic and I can sort of like imagine myself in the place of the victim.
Well, not even that, just imagine being the investigator as well. That would haunt you for your whole
definitely.
It would haunt you, your dreams when you're awake, just knowing that this happened and seeing it multiple times and different kind of not scenarios, but different injuries. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is a tough one. Anyway, carry on. Sorry.
I just want to add one more thing. Like, the investigators were shocked, and mind you, this is coming from an era that was after like the Second World War and the famine, and so just following like a horrible time, and yet it was still quite shocking, even, you know, when you're sort of...
These investigators or people have seen the worst of the worst, and yet they are still shocked and appalled at what they are finding and what they are seeing. So, and just, it's just such a... Because he's definitely some sort of weird opportunist, but I feel like he's targeting like people who he perceives as weak and vulnerable, and like taking the boy at the kiosk was a bit risky, like compared to all of his other murders. That's quite a risky one. So he must be on this like high right now. I'm never gonna get caught. Doesn't matter who I take, when I take him, I'm not gonna get caught, because he still hasn't got caught, even though he took this boy in broad daylight. It's just a really sick mind, isn't it?
And he targeted people he knew as well.
Yeah, that's what shocked me, because I had to reread that 3 times. I was like, that can't be right. And I had to read it, and I was like, this is like a family friend, it sounds like. That's how I kind of envisioned it. Like, oh, hello, Bob next door. I'm now going to kill you and your daughter. Like, that's close to home. He just doesn't care. He's just in this one track. I'm going to do it now, and that's it. Like, once he's thought about it, he's doing it regardless. There's no like thought process after. I think like I don't even necessarily think it's opportunist. I think he just kind of I could do this, and just a split decision. He's done it.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to read, because there are so many psychiatry reports on this guy written by people all around the world, even like up to this day. You know, people write their dissertations on it. And I was thinking about, do you know what? It would be interesting to read it. But then I went through all of these articles when I was doing my research, and then I just decided, no, it's too much. It's just too much.
Dark, isn't it? This is, I mean, any time there's murder, of course it's dark. But this is just something, I don't think half of this I've ever read before. Like, and there's so many of them. This guy is just killing multiple people. Yeah, it's definitely a hard one.
I mean, we are in 1984. Yeah, now, what I just read. But in the previous episode, we talked about the first murder, which happened in 1978. And by now, again, I'm sorry I haven't paid attention to, at this point, how many murders happened. But I think we are around 20 by now.
That's just the ones we know about as well, isn't it? I guess there must be more or more.
Oh, no, these are like, they didn't know about it then. But as I said, it's been reported and recorded because he did confess to every single one of them. So when I was doing the research, obviously they know about all of the murders.
I just think he's a very, very, very sick, twisted individual, this man. Oh, but yeah.
A highlighter.
Oh, the timeline moved?
Oh, yeah. The timeline moved with a jarring lack of friction between extreme violence and mundane state business. Barely hours after Alexeyeva was dead, Chikatilo was on a flight to Tashkent, the Uzbek capital, tasked by his employer with purchasing electrical switches. He used the cover of the Soviet transit system to expand his reach. By the time he touched down back in Rostov on the 15th of August, he had already added 2 more victims to his count. An unidentified young woman and a 10-year-old girl named Akmaral Saidalieva. The return to Rostov saw the violence tighten around the same geographical point. Within 2 weeks, the body of 11-year-old Alexander Chapel was found stripped naked on the banks of the Don River. The forensic details recorded a horrific combination of strangulation, castration, and gouged out eyes. The boy had been dumped only yards away from the spot where Alexeyeva's remains had been found just weeks prior. On the 6th of September, the spree continued in the city's Park of Aviators, where Chikatilo targeted and killed a 24-year-old librarian named Irina Luchinskaya. The investigation briefly collided with Chikatilo on the 13th of September 1984, but the system wasn't designed to recognize him yet. 2 undercover detectives tracked him from a bus station through the central market, observing him harassing women in broad daylight. They brought him in on a whim, more concerned with his public indecency than the mounting body count in the woods. When they tossed his bag onto a table, the contents, a large knife, rope, and lubricant, should have been a death sentence. The police used a petty theft record from his previous job to hold him, buying just enough time to realize he looked exactly like the man seen with Dmitry Tashnikov for a few days. The Rostov task force was sitting on the answer to their nightmare. They drew his blood, expecting the lab to confirm what the physical evidence already suggested. The result was a total forensic collapse. Chikatilo's blood was type A, but the semen evidence gathered from 6 crime scenes that summer had been recorded as type AB. Instead of questioning the lab or the biology, the investigators surrendered to the paperwork. They logged his name into the card index, noted the blood discrepancy, and effectively gave him a pass. They had the killer in a cell and chose to believe a flawed test result over their own eyes, eventually turning him back out onto the street.
Oh, the power he must have felt.
So with this one, just to add to this, so I researched this, that the science of the secretor, so it means in about 80% of the population, secretors, your ABO blood type antigens aren't just in your blood, they are also secreted into other bodily fluids like saliva, semen, and sweat. If you are a secretor with type A blood, your semen will also test as type A. So Chikatilo belonged to the other 20%, which is non-secretors, and for these individuals, the antigens don't transfer to other fluids in the same way. So, yeah, his semen tested as a different blood type, basically.
They wouldn't have known this much science back then, would they?
They didn't. That's the thing. They didn't know about it, and this is why they let him go. So the legal system finally squeezed Chikatilo, but only for the rolls of linoleum he had stolen months prior. On the strength of that petty theft, he was stripped of his Communist Party membership and handed a 1-year sentence. It was a bureaucratic victory that masked catastrophic failure. While he sat in a cell for a minor property crime, the true scale of his violence was finally being mapped out by the state. On the 8th of October 1984, the Russian Public Prosecutor's Office made a massive course correction. They formally linked 23 separate murders into a single unified case, admitting the killings were the work of one individual. This move forced the release of the intellectually disabled youth who had been beaten into giving false confessions. The state was finally admitting its errors, yet the man responsible for the 23 bodies was currently serving time for theft. So this is just extra heartbreaking to... I don't really know in this case what does the intellectually disabled youth mean, but I can imagine they were kids with autism or, young people with autism or Down
as well. Like, if they arrested him for theft, like he's in prison and no murders were committed, and then he obviously gets out, doesn't he? But did they not kind of think it must be him because now he's out, the murders are starting again? I guess there's something to talk about further when we read the pack more.
I think it's because there were bodies that they still found, and also that's not just that. The window to keep him off the streets slammed shut on the 12th of December 1984 after serving only 3 months of his sentence. Chikatilo was released from custody, so 3 months, not a whole year. He walked out of the prison gates as a man with a criminal record for theft, while the task force was still hunting the person responsible for nearly 24 eviscerations. So here's the answer to your question. It wasn't a whole year.
Yeah, see, 3 months isn't that long, is it, either, really? To get forensic evidence and stuff like that, they probably didn't even have time to do anything.
And also, as I said, probably they found bodies whilst he was in there. I mean, how many people did he kill in this 1 year? This year was the worst year until he was active, 1984.
Yeah, they must have found the bodies and just continue to try and look for him.
Yeah, so probably sort of helped him as well if they did find bodies, because he was in prison, and the bodies kept turning up. So it was kind of, yeah, it's not that guy. Does that make sense?
It so could have been helped, all these future killings, if they just had him for longer. But yeah, it's just very tragic, isn't it?
Or if they would have just started a trial based on the evidence they gathered and not just look at, oh, okay, it's a different blood type. Yeah, we can let him go. Anyway, so yeah, just to go into the further crimes. So when Chikatilo walked out of prison in December 1984, he transitioned back into the mundane life of a Soviet worker. He secured a position in the supply department of a locomotive factory in Novocherkassk, deliberately keeping a low profile to avoid the eyes of the law. For months, the violence stopped. It wasn't until the 1st of August 1985, during a business trip to Moscow, that the dormant pattern resurfaced. So he was dormant for more than a year after that.
He must have been a bit scared, thinking, I better calm down a little bit.
Well, yeah, he was almost caught, wasn't he?
Well, yeah, but the problem is with these urges that these killers and even like paedophiles and people like that have is they can't stop them because the urges. So it was just inevitable that he was going to do it again. Just took him a year to do it.
Well, you remember Piroshka, even though she was caught fairly early on, she killed 4 girls, didn't she? But she was speeding up as well with those 4 cases.
Yeah, sure.
And also we were talking about Kovac Peter in one of the episodes. He was very similar to that. But again, he was caught before Andrei Chikatilo. But his crime... Again, they caught another guy instead of him, and that person, just based on that, the first victim had a boyfriend, and they arrested the boyfriend because they had some fights, as you would do with your boyfriend. So the police caught him in Hungary, and he was in prison for 11 years, but he was lucky. Well, if you can call that luck, he wasn't executed because the Supreme Court thought the evidence was a little bit blurry, so to speak. But he did spend 11 years of his life in prison before they actually caught the murderer. He was in Moscow, and he was standing on the railway platform near Domodedovo airport when he crossed paths with 18-year-old Natalia Poklishtova. He managed to talk her off the train and lead her into the dense woods near the village of Vostriakovo. Once they were isolated by the thicket, the restraint of the past several months evaporated. He bound the girl to ensure she couldn't fight back, then drove his knife into her neck and chest 38 times. He finished the attack by strangling her to death in the dirt. It was a brutal return to form that proved prison had done nothing to curb his impulses. It had only made him wait for a new opportunity far from home. The investigation into Natalia Poklistova's murder moved with a rare sense of urgency. Detectives operated on the theory that the killer had flown from the Rostov Oblast to Moscow, prompting a massive sweep of Aeroflot flight records for everyone traveling between the two regions during late July and early August. It was a logical, modern approach to tracking a predator, but it failed because Chikatilo didn't follow the expected path. He had taken the train to Moscow, leaving no paper trail in the flight manifests for the investigators to find. The lack of a lead allowed the violence to return to the Rostov region almost immediately. On the 27th of August, just 4 weeks after the Moscow murder, Chikatilo killed Irina Guyaeva in Shakhty. The forensic team didn't need a blood test this time to see the connection. The specific nature of the wounds and the sheer aggression of the attack mirrored Poklistova's death perfectly. Despite the state's attempt to track him through bureaucracy and travel logs, the bodies were the only reliable evidence of his movements. By November 1985, the state's frustration culminated in the appointment of a special procurator, Issa Kostoyev. He was brought in to bring order to a sprawling manhunt that now commanded the exclusive attention of 15 procurators and 29 detectives. Kostoyev's first move was to strip the investigation back to its foundations. He ordered a meticulous re-examination of every known murder linked to the case, forcing his team to look at the evidence with fresh eyes while they simultaneously resumed the varying cycle of questioning known sex offenders and homosexuals. As winter set in, the tactical approach shifted from paperwork to the pavement. The militia resumed aggressive patrolling of the railway networks around Rostov, turning the transit hubs into a gauntlet of surveillance. They didn't just rely on uniformed presence, they deployed plainclothes female officers to loiter around bus and train stations. These officers were essentially bait placed in the exact environments where the killer had successfully snatched his victims for years, waiting for a middle-aged man to make a move. In a move that signaled a desperate departure from traditional Soviet policing, Viktor Burakov pushed the investigation into the realm of the mind. At his request, the task force reached out to Dr. Alexander Bukhanovsky, a psychiatrist whose involvement marked the first time the Soviet Union had ever consulted a behavioral expert in a serial killer case. It was an admission that the physical evidence and blood tests had failed and they needed a different kind of lens to find their man. The police opened their files completely, handing Bukhanovsky every crime scene photo and medical examiner's report they had accumulated over the years. The arrangement was simple. The psychiatrist would immerse himself in the gore and the ritualistic details of the killings to build a psychological profile. The goal was to transform a pile of cold data into a portrait of a living person, identifying the mental landscape of a killer who had spent years hiding in plain sight. So yeah, just to add that I think the profilers of the FBI, they've already been established in the 70s in America, and the Soviet Union didn't want to admit that this is like real science, so to speak. Well, we can't call it science, but they didn't want to ask for a psychiatrist's help because they didn't want to do the same thing as Americans would. But I think if they would have done that like in the early years of his crimes, they probably would have kept him in prison in the first place.
It sounds like this investigator who's come in and who's like taken over, he like knows him. Like I'm getting the feeling that he knows his stuff, that he's putting like women out there, that like undercover officers, he's putting more people on the street, he's getting like fresh eyes, he's doing all these like new techniques and stuff. So yeah, let's hope things move quite quickly.
But he also went back to like investigating homosexuals, which it was already a failed attempt at the beginning.
Yeah, it's a bit weird weird that I'm guessing that was more of like a hate kind of crime, that they were interviewing homosexuals because they maybe wanted it to be one of them so they could put it in the paper and stuff. But it just feels like really weird. Like, why did you keep going back to them? It's obviously not them. But very, very weird, like, thing to do. But I guess that was more like a kind of hate.
Leave the gays alone.
Yeah, like, obviously not the gays, it's someone else. Like, yeah, it's just, I think that was more of like a hate crime, that they probably wanted it to be a gay person. But yeah.
I think you're onto something, that they definitely quite badly wanted it to be someone like, a sexual deviant, so to speak, as they looked at the gays back then. But
you still get it now with like people in the paper, don't you? Like, if there's like a particular topic of conversation, the papers will they will go out there and find all of these stories, and it drives hate. It happens still today, but it's just I think they just really wanted it to be them. And also, I guess, like, the mindset back then in the 80s of gay people was, they were very hated, weren't they? So they were pretty blamed for everything.
Especially in the Soviet Union. Like, there was no such thing as being gay. If you were gay, then you were a criminal.
Yeah, and I think that's like going back to it, isn't it? But they wasted a lot of time interviewing them and re-interviewing them. It's like, yeah. But I guess hate is it clouds your judgment, doesn't it?
Definitely. Anyway, so the psychological profile, which is super interesting. The psychological profile Bukhanovsky delivered was a 65-page autopsy of a living mind. He described the killer as a man trapped in his late 40s, a recluse who had survived a childhood defined by isolation and pain. This was not a social predator capable of charm. Bukhanovsky argued the man was fundamentally unable to flirt or court women. Instead, he was likely a well-educated individual, probably married with children of his own, hiding his deviance behind the veneer of domestic stability. The core of the profile focused on a deep-seated sexual dysfunction. Bukhanovsky identified the killer as a sadist who suffered from total impotence, a man who could only find arousal through the infliction of suffering. In this framework, the acts of stabbing and evisceration were not just violence, they were a desperate analog for the sexual intercourse his body refused to perform. The knife wasn't just a weapon, it was a surrogate for a penis that had failed him. Bukhanovsky also used the geography of the crimes to track the killer's daily life. Because the murders frequently occurred on weekdays near major transport hubs across the entire Rostov Oblast, the psychiatrist argued that the killer's job must require constant travel. By analyzing the specific days the bodies appeared, he concluded the killer wasn't wandering aimlessly, he was most likely following a strict production schedule tied to a legitimate job. Chikatilo monitored the investigation through newspaper reports as the manhunt became public knowledge. For nearly a year following the murder of Irina Guyeva in August 1985, no victims were discovered in the Rostov or Moscow oblasts that displayed his characteristic mutilations. This period of inactivity suggested he was consciously keeping his urges under control while tracking the progress of the authorities in the press. This psychological profile is just so spot on, and they still and they had a record of him. They knew he had a family, they knew he had children and a job, and he belonged to the Communist Party. So they had everything about him written down.
Do you know what I find weird? Right, it's how spot on it is. It's like,
oh yeah,
like you said, it's incredible. But obviously he had, is it 2 children? I think he read. Is it 2 kids? I think he had. How did he even make them if he's so impotent? Like, surely they're like.
It's obviously they didn't do your homework, so he would ejaculate and his wife would. I was really hoping I don't have to talk about this ever again. But yeah, his wife would use her fingers to do so.
That shit works.
I don't. Apparently, yeah.
Are they even his kids?
Yeah. They were his kids.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if that's like a legit. I'm going to Google this after and see if that's legit. That's like basically Turkey based him without the baster. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, they might not have been his children. I guess. Don't know. Do you like?
I mean, guess it doesn't really matter at this point. He
No,
was
but I was
raising
curious.
he was raising them, and apparently he wasn't even a bad father.
They never are
Yeah,
psychos.
he was a psycho. Well, I don't know.
Because that's the thing, isn't it? You know, like when we looked at the other killers and stuff, there's normally like this person is a psychopath, or he's this, or she's that, blah blah blah. But this man he doesn't fit in any box in my head. I think he's just pure. There's no word to describe him, because I don't necessarily think he is a psychopath, and I don't think he is like. I guess he is more of a sadist, I guess, out of all of it. But he's just he's just pure evil. It's just a really weird,
I think
weird.
He's a failed psychopath, definitely. He does have the ambitions to be someone. He just can't do it. So he just went down this path. And he's depraved. Is that the word I'm looking for? Depraved? Like he's not right in the mind.
He's definitely something.
He's not depraved. So, from the early ages of his life, like he was a teacher and he would, do things to his students that was very inappropriate. So I don't think a psychopath would have done that.
Yeah, he's just a very evil person.
Yeah, psychopaths are calculated. They don't make mistakes like that.
Yeah, very weird. This whole case is really it is intriguing to a certain extent, but it's sickening at the same time. Like I said, I think I said at the beginning of the podcast, I couldn't read it all. I had to skip parts. I was like, no, I can't. It's a very difficult case.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, we are getting towards the end now. Hopefully, we are not out of the woods. I have to say that. So on July 23rd, 1986, the body of 33-year-old Yubov Golovaka was found stabbed to death in Rostov's Myanikovsky district. Investigators tentatively linked her death to the serial killer based on 3 factors. The victim had been stripped naked, she had suffered over 20 stab wounds, and the semen type found at the scene matched the AB type previously identified. However, the case created significant internal debate. Unlike the established pattern, Golovaka had not been dismembered or mutilated, and her body was not found near a mass transportation hub. These discrepancies led many investigators to doubt that she was a victim of the man they were seeking. So the gap in the timeline of discovered victims ended on August 18, 1986, when a body was found buried in the grounds of a collective farm in Bataysk. The victim was an 18-year-old court secretary named Irina Pogoryelova. The wounds bore the unmistakable trademark of the killer. Her body had been slit open from the neck to the genitals. Her eyes had been cut out and one of her breasts had been removed. The discovery changed the perspective of the task force because the murderer had made a deliberate effort to bury Pogoryelova's remains. Some investigators theorized that the previous year's lack of victims wasn't due to a lack of killing. Instead, they suspected it was a result of the killer successfully burying the bodies, explaining why no signature mutilations had been reported since August 1985. So yeah, as I told you before, that he would just, throw some mud and some leaves on the bodies, but after he was caught, he started to properly bury the bodies as well.
Well, I'm starting to think, that woman, the 33-year-old, I don't even know if that was him or just a copycat killer trying to make it seem.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But then I can't remember if he would talk about her later on, but apparently after his trial, when he was talking to this psychiatrist, after that he would tell the police about every single murder in detail. Like he would remember where the stones were around, in the surroundings, like that.
This is a sick man, innit? Probably relived this every day for his life.
What a weird thing to remember. Anyway, by the autumn of 1986, the investigators turned to the calendar to explain their own failure. The deaths of 1985 and 1986 were confined to the heat of July and August, creating a seasonal void that the police filled with theory. They convinced themselves the perpetrators perpetrator was a migrant who had relocated to another sector of the Soviet Union, a man who only surfaced in the Rostov Oblast when the summer allowed. The Rostov police translated the butcheries into the language of bureaucracy. They drafted bulletins that catalogued the specific geometry of the wounds and the anatomical signatures left behind by the blade. These documents were dispatched to every precinct and outpost across the Soviet Union, a desperate wide net search for matching atrocities in distant jurisdictions. The response from the collective Soviet interior was a total silence. Every report came back negative. No other territory recognized the work of the Rostov killer. The 3 killings of 1987 were swallowed by the geography of the Soviet state. Because the deaths occurred during business travel far from the Rostov Oblast, the crimes fell through the cracks of fractured police system. The local task force remained focused on their own borders while the killer moved freely across the Republic lines. No one in Moscow or Rostov connected the files. So about this, I mean, if that would have been the only mistake the police made, I would sort of understand it, because the Soviet Union was massive. Like, think of like America massive. And, you know, they have different jurisdictions there, you know, with like every state. And the jurisdictions don't really communicate with each other, but they have the FBI who have jurisdiction everywhere else, in every state. But I would assume that maybe the Soviet Union didn't have like federal police that would know about cases, you know, hundreds of miles from each other. So if that was the only mistake, I would say, yeah, okay, I kind of understand that this would have slowed them down in the investigation. But this guy, Chikatilo, was in the Rostov Oblast, in that area, and most of his murders happened in that area. So if they would have just concentrated on that one area, and again, they had him in, he had knife, he had lubricant, he had rope in his bag, and you know, he was harassing women in the train station. They could have caught him easily.
The other thing is really that makes me just feel like, what the hell's gone on here, is they literally forced confessions from other people, like homosexuals and the disabled. They forced them out of these people, and to the point where they committed suicide, but they couldn't get this man to confess, even though they had him and interrogated him.
He was working for the KGB for a while as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of these murders could have been avoided, but they just didn't press him hard enough.
They didn't press him because he was, like, you have to understand that if you were a part of the Communist Party at that point in the Soviet Union, you were like, you know, the perfect citizen, yeah? And he was protected. He was a soldier. He worked for the KGB for a while. And yeah, they're not going to look at him the same way as they would look at homosexuals or mentally disabled people. That was the main issue.
Such a shame, innit? They could have been all avoided.
It was the perfect society, the Soviet Union. There was no such thing as someone who belongs to the Communist Party, you know, could be a serial killer. Anyway, so, on the 16th of May, 12-year-old Oleg Makarenkov stood at a train station in the Urals town of Revda. He was led away with the promise of a meal at a dasha. Dasha is like, just to give you some clarity on it, it's like a second home, like a summer home kind of thing, holiday home. So, the boy was taken into the woods near the tracks and murdered. The earth held his remains in total silence for 4 years before they were stumbled upon in 1991. The local authorities in Revda filed the disappearance as an isolated event, unaware of the pattern emerging in the south. The violence shifted to the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia in July. Ivan Bilovetsky, a 12-year-old boy, was killed and left behind in another jurisdiction that failed to look beyond its own city limit. By 15th of September, the movement reached the outskirts of Leningrad. Yuri Tereshonok, a 16-year-old vocational student, was led into the woodland and killed. 3 bodies were left in 3 different time zones. The bureaucracy of the police ensured that each murder stayed a local mystery, buried in paperwork that never crossed the regional border. 3 different time zones. That's like committing a murder in England and then go to France, commit a murder, and then go to, Hungary and commit a murder.
Yeah, he's getting a bit ballsy now, isn't he?
Well, he's moving in such distances that it was impossible. But I think he probably does this because he was caught in 1984. So he thought, oh, okay, I shouldn't be doing it at the same place all the time because they are going to catch me. So, I move quite far away. And then let's do it there. Chikatilo murdered 3 times in 1988. The violence began in April at Krasny Sulin. He lured an unidentified woman off a train and led her into the bush. He roped her hands behind her back and jammed her mouth full of dirt to kill the sound. Chikatilo used the blade to take the nose from her face and open the skin of her neck with a series of deep strikes before he crushed her head with a concrete slab. On the 6th of April, the police stood over the corpse. They saw the familiar geometry of the neck wounds, but the bureaucratic gears locked up. Because the victim had not been disemboweled and her genitals remained intact, the detectives hesitated. They allowed the blunt force trauma of the concrete slab to distract them from the signature of the knife, leaving the file unlinked. The movement shifted to the Ukrainian city of Ilovaisk in May. Chikatilo killed 9-year-old Alexei Voronko, leaving him with mutilations that broke through the departmental hesitation. The specific cruelty of the boy's wounds forced the authorities to acknowledge that Chikatilo was active again and moving through the rail lines. The murder was finally added to the official tally. 2 months later, on the 14th of July, 15-year-old Yevgeny Muratov disappeared from the Donleshko's station near Shakhty. So Shakhty is where he lives, basically. The earth held Muratov's body until April 1989. By the time the police reached the site, the remains were mostly bone. The autopsy revealed the skeletal evidence of 39 strikes and the clinical removal of the genitals. Despite the stack of bodies and the recurring patterns of Chikatilo's blade, the state remained trapped by its own regional borders. The police treated the rail stations as isolated jurisdictions, leaving Chikatilo to move through the transit system while they stood over the dead and argued about the paperwork. Chikatilo waited until the 28th of February 1989 to kill again. He brought 16-year-old Tatiana Rizhova to his daughter's vacant apartment and murdered her. Jesus, in his own daughter's apartment.
Honestly, it's just like, what the hell was going through your thought? And imagine, like, when he did get arrested and he said, oh, I took it to my daughter's apartment. The daughter's going to be like, what happened in there? I think I'd have to burn it down. I just couldn't go back there, could you?
Definitely not. Jesus Christ. He dismembered the body and hid the remains in a nearby sewer. When the police found the parts, the bureaucratic failure of the investigation repeated itself. Because Rizhova had been dismembered, the authorities refused to link her death to the manhunt. They treated the mutilation as a separate category of crime, failing to see the killer evolving his methods within the same city. Between May and August, Chikatilo killed 4 more victims. 3 of these deaths occurred in Rostov and Shakhty, the very heart of the investigation's territory. Despite the proximity, the systemic rot of the police force ensured that only 2 of these 4 victims were added to the official file. The department remained unable to reconcile the evidence of the new strikes with the existing records, leaving Chikatilo to operate in the open while the investigators argued over the classification of the dead. They could have found evidence if they looked at it, if they connected the dots. They could have found evidence, again, that would have brought him in. That's what's so annoying about this. If they weren't messing around with all the paperwork, oh, what happened here? Who did this? Is it connected? Is it not connected? Or they didn't even look at that it could have been connected. They wasted so much time and they might have found something that would have connected him.
I think that's the most heartbreaking thing, is like the more they're messing over this paperwork, the less time they have to get him, and he could have been arrested so much earlier.
Well, he should have stayed in prison when they caught him at the first place. Yeah. Anyway, the investigators focused on the rail lines as the bodies of victims definitively linked to the manhunt continued to appear. Because the majority of these remains were discovered near railway stations, the state moved to a more aggressive surveillance tactic. Officers in civil clothes were deployed across the Rostov Oblast to discreetly film and photograph passengers on the trains. The authorities also rigged several trains with hidden cameras. These machines were installed to capture a visual record of any victim in the company of the killer before they vanished from the station. This change toward surveillance was a direct result of the geographic pattern of the death, yet it remained a reactive measure. On the 14th of January 1990, Chikatilo came across 11-year-old Andrei Kravchenko outside the Shakti cinema. He lured him from the theater on the pretense of being shown important Western films that Chikatilo claimed to have at his home. His heavily stabbed, emasculated body was found a month later in a remote part of woodland. On the 7th of March, 7 weeks after Kravchenko's murder, Chikatilo lured Yaroslav Makarov, a 10-year-old boy from a Rostov train station, to Rostov's botanical gardens. His eviscerated body was located the next day. So just in case, if you're wondering, why these kids went with him? Because, you have stranger danger in the Western countries. In the Soviet Union, that was not a thing, yeah? When you were a kid, you were taught to be extremely respectful towards adults and do what they say. It doesn't matter if it's a stranger. So this is why these kids had zero, precaution following a stranger.
I did think this. I was literally thinking that, why did they go? But that would make sense. If you're told as a child to respect elders and do what's asked of you, these kids would have just literally walked into their deaths, wouldn't they?
Yeah, because, there are no serial killers in a perfect society, so you can go stranger. It's fine. The pressure of the public and the politics. So on the 11th of March in 1990, Fetisov called a meeting to address the stagnant progress of the manhunt. The atmosphere was grim. After 7 years of investigation, the Ministry of the Interior and the restless public were demanding blood. Both Fetisov and Viktor Burakov had poured nearly a decade into this, yet they were further from a resolution than ever. The investigation lost its edge during a pause in the mid-80s, but by March 1990, the body count had spiked by another 6 victims. The old Soviet curtain had been pulled back by glasnost. Glasnost, just to give you an explanation, is basically the freedom of, not really speech, but publications in the newspapers. So, before that, so this is 1990, where the wall came down and the curtain had been pulled. Yeah, the Soviet Union fallen apart. So finally the media was free to print whatever they wanted. So that's the glasnost. So the old Soviet curtain had been pulled back by glasnost, meaning the state could no longer bury its failures in silence. The press was finally broadcasting the carnage. Fetisov saw the rot and the laziness in his own ranks, warning his team that if they didn't produce a suspect, he would start firing people. The threats from the office meant nothing on the ground. By August 1990, 3 more people were dead. Chikatilo lured Lyubov Zuyeva into the woods near Donleshkoz in April, where she lay undiscovered for months. In July, he snatched 13-year-old Viktor Petrov from a station and killed him in the botanical gardens. 2 weeks later, 11-year-old Ivan Fomin was murdered in the reeds of Novocherkassk beach. The system was issuing ultimatums while the body count continued to climb. The mounting body count forced a massive shift in tactics. Since the victims were consistently turning up along a single rail line in the Rostov Oblast, Burakov designed a trap. He wanted a heavy, impossible-to-miss uniform presence at all the major stations. The goal was to scare the killer away from the big hubs and funnel him toward the smaller, quieter stops where undercover agents would be waiting. The state authorized the plan, flooding the region's stations with 360 men. Both the uniformed unit and the plainclothes agents had strict orders: stop any man seen with a child or a young woman, then record his name and passport details. This, by the way, they should have done this the moment they were sending people out to the train stations.
I know, it's crazy.
Like send an armada to the big ones, so he would definitely not go there, and then just send, civil clothed ones into the small ones. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know why they haven't done it. But the real focus was on 3 specific locations: Kundryucha, Donleshkoz, and Lesostep. These were the smallest stations on the route and the spots where the killer struck the most. Burakov left these 3 stations without a visible police presence, using only undercover officers to watch the platforms. It was a deliberate attempt to force the murderer into a corner. The operation went live on the 27th of October 1990. The grim reality of the investigation sharpened on the 30th of October when police discovered 16-year-old Vadim Gromov at Donleshko station. The sheer brutality of the scene removed any doubt that the killer was still active in the area. Gromov had been strangled, stabbed 27 times and castrated. The killer had also severed the tip of his tongue and stabbed his left eye. You would think, okay, this was the worst thing I've heard and that was it. And then something else comes up and it's even worse, and it just doesn't stop, does it?
I think that's what makes it such a gruesome case, is it's just constant terror for these victims.
Constant and gets worse and worse every time. Okay, forensic analysis determined he had been killed on the 17th of October, just 10 days before the saturation initiative had officially begun. While the police were processing the Gromov side, the violence continued elsewhere. That same day, Chikatilo lured another 16-year-old, Viktor Tishchenko, off a train at Kirpichnaya station. He led the boy into the nearby forest and murdered him. Tishchenko's body was recovered on the 3rd of November, showing 40 separate knife wounds and the same signature castration. Right, so the final murder. On the 6th of November 1990, the trap at Donleshko station failed to save 22-year-old Svetlana Koroshtik. Chikatilo murdered and mutilated her in the nearby woods before walking back toward the platform. It was there that Igor Rybakov, an undercover officer, spotted him. Rybakov watched as the man approached a well to wash his hands and face. As he got closer, the officer noticed red flags. Grass and soil stains covered the man's elbows, a small red smear marked his cheek, and one of his fingers looked severely wounded. Chikatilo looked out of place. While locals often entered the woods to forage for mushrooms, he was dressed in formal clothes and carrying a nylon sports bag, gear completely useless for a scavenger. Rybakov stopped him and checked his papers. Because there was no immediate evidence of a crime, the officer had no legal grounds to make an arrest. Chikatilo was allowed to walk away.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Just arrest him.
I know, it's like nerve-wracking, even though I know what's gonna happen, but still. Rybakov returned to his office and filed a routine report, noting the name on the ID and the suspicious smear on the man's face. The discovery of Svetlana Korostik's body on the 13th of November marked the 38th death tied to the investigation. The police immediately scrambled to the Donleshko's station logs, hunting for any name recorded by the undercover teams in the days prior. Chikatilo's name didn't just appear, it screamed off the page. He was already a ghost in their system, having been interrogated in 1984 and flagged on a national watch list in 1987. So he was flagged down twice within the 8 years.
They better arrest him. I'm turning off the podcast right now if they don't arrest him.
As investigators cross-referenced his work, travel with the dates of the murders, the geographic overlap became undeniable. Wherever his employers sent him, a trail of corpses followed. When they started digging into his history as an educator, the profile shifted from suspicious to predatory. He had not left his teaching jobs by choice. He'd been chased out of 2 different schools. His former colleagues described a history of lewdness and sexual advances toward his own student, complaints the state had documented and then ignored for years. The man Rybakov had watched washing his face at the well was finally merging with the monster they had been hunting since the 70s. So yeah, they finally
About time.
They had a lead finally. It's really, really frustrating, even though, this has happened and it's nothing can be changed about it. But even as I was reading it, even as I was doing my research, it was just so nerve-wracking that they had all this evidence and everything against him. I mean, he had knives in his bag and rope. Who goes around with knives and rope in his bag? And
lube.
And yes.
It's craziness, but hopefully this is it now. We'll have to find out in part 3 if this is it.
And the thing is, then, if they didn't ignore the whole thing and it didn't just go by the blood test, they could have looked into all of those murders and his work schedule, and it would have matched up.
Well, also, if they were allowed to publicise this, because it sounds like they weren't, his work would have been like, hang on a minute, we've sent him to every one of these places where these bodies keep turning up.
Yeah, that's
but
the thing.
No one was talking to each other.
I mean, I don't know, because we did say that he was following the investigation closely, but what does that mean? How much was, released to the public? I can't imagine it was censored until...
I guess we'll never know, will we?
We never know, but he did follow it. But I don't know if he was following it as from the beginning or just, sort of after his arrest, after his 3 months in prison.
I just feel like there was so many aspects to this case where he could have been caught, but he just wasn't because of his status at one point, and just no one was talking to each other. It's just a bit unfortunate. So many people died.
Yeah, and just stupid little bureaucratic things like the blood test. And I'm sure if they looked into it deeper... Okay, yeah, I Googled it and it took me 2 seconds to find out why his blood test was negative. But I cannot believe that this is something they didn't... If they knew what a blood test was, then they would have known about the secretor thing as well.
But it's also about the profiler, isn't it? It's just they could have got the profile in much earlier, because that profile is spot on. So if they would have got the profile in earlier, perhaps some of these people might have been saved, but I guess it's one of those things, isn't it? You're never going to know. They weren't saved, unfortunately.
I think that was just politics. It was just the politics of it. It was really hard for the police to admit that they needed a psychological profile, and that just slowed down everything a lot more as well.
Well, let's continue on part 3 and see. Hopefully, he gets his comeuppance.
Yes, let's see what happens. So in part 3, we are going to talk about what happens after his arrest. And hopefully Roderick will be able to join us as well. Thanks, guys, for listening. This is Stacey and Reika today. This was Start with the Weird. And next week we will get back to the 3rd part of Andrei Chikatilo. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And see you then.
Bye.
Bye.